So I've been using this as my main since sometime after I got done with that 10-hour video that you saw with that awesome thumbnail. And I've already done one video on the Pixel 3. If you watched that, you would remember I said that this could be looked at from two perspectives. One from that of a phone and the other from that of a camera. The previous video was all about Pixel the camera. So this video is all about Pixel the phone, which for me is even more interesting than Pixel the camera. So let's talk about that, starting with the design. The Pixel 3 is easily the best design Google has ever achieved in any smartphone. For reference, this is what the original Pixel looked like with those huge bezels. Then came the Pixel 2 and the Pixel 2 XL. The Pixel 2 was even worse looking and feeling than the original Pixel. The XL did have thinner bezels, but then it messed up with the display. And now we have the Pixel 3 and the 3 XL, and it's totally clear which one looks better. Now, the very first thing that I noticed about the Pixel 3 was just how tall this is. It's not that wide, so it felt slightly narrow at first, but it started feeling normal after a day or two. The second thing that I noticed were those buttons. I remember the ones in the Pixel 2 were super non-tactile and very mushy. These are better, still pretty hard, but definitely better, plus that colored power button is just amazing. Also, every color of the phone has an all black front and not white, which would have showcased the inner display bezel. So I didn't choose the rear of the phone to be black because every phone that I've ever owned has been black. I also didn't choose it to be white because it's just too plain and flat and boring. So I went with the not pink version, and I'm kind of impressed. It's really not pink. To me, it looks like a light beige with a very slight hue of pink, and it's different. It's not boring, and again, coupled with that orange power button, it's really attractive to look at. Now, just like the last year, it does have an extra coating on top of its primary material, which this time happens to be glass. But it's got this really soft and smooth matte finish, which not only gets really cold in the mornings, but also feels extremely premium. It's kind of underrated. You really have to hold this in your hand to understand the way it feels. But when you combine that with the super glossy and smooth frame, this also becomes the most slippery phone that you would use. It has slid out of my pocket while I'm sitting on my couch or even while I'm driving, so you inevitably would have to get a case for it. And speaking of cases, Rhino Shield actually has these incredibly sexy cases that are also equally as protective. I personally use the solid suit cases which cover the entire phone, and they not only come in black and white but also a pink one for the not pink phone. They also make incredibly robust bumpers which cover the frame of the phone and let the rear shine through. So what I'll do is I'll leave all of these linked below along with an exclusive discount code. Enjoy! But the last but the most evident change that I've got to talk about is the size of the bezels. A lot of people think they are still big and uncomfortable, but I'm not one of them, considering the fact that I've used the OnePlus 6T, which just has a really thin frame. And it's interesting to see that even though the bezels are smaller than the ones in the Pixel 2, they still have all the sensors, still have those front-firing speakers, and now also have a secondary front-facing camera that I talked about in my last video. Now, the speakers to me sound louder than the ones in the iPhone XR, but not as clear. These do get slightly muffled at the highest volume. But they get so loud at the highest volume that you can feel the back of the phone vibrating. The other thing that I noticed is that the speaker on top has a lesser volume when compared to the one at the bottom. I noticed this when I mistakenly put my thumb on top of the bottom speaker, but luckily they do combine really well, so it doesn't come to notice while watching any video or a movie. Speaking of videos, let's talk about that display. So now it's a 5.5-inch 1080p display. It's made by LG in case you're wondering, and for the most part, it's a really great display. It's got round corners for symmetry, it's really crisp, it gets bright enough to be visible outdoors, but I still think that an iPhone's display has the most accurate saturation and colors of all the displays that I've ever used. I find the maximum difference in the thumbnails of the videos on the YouTube app. When you compare them to the ones on the iPhone, they do look a bit too saturated. But luckily that's the only place where I found a tremendous difference, because otherwise in general usage, Instagram is fine, editing photographs is fine, watching videos is fine. If it's not, then you can actually choose between various color settings. So there is natural, which is a bit less saturated, there is adaptive, which is a bit too saturated, and then there is boosted, which is somewhat in the middle, and that's what I stick with. I think the display at boosted settings combined with those speakers make this a pretty solid media consumption device. However, I don't think it's the best gaming experience you can get. I would give that to the iPhone XR again. The XR's display has a 120Hz touch sensing rate. Not a refresh rate like the iPad Pro, but a touch sensing rate. This means that their displays respond quicker than before to touch, basically a more responsive touchscreen. But if you use these latest iPhones and you switch to any other phone like I did to the Pixel 3, there's a really high chance that you won't notice these differences in the general usage. But if you game, especially PUBG, there's a chance that you might notice a little bit of resistance like I did. But then there's probably just 2 of you who would switch from an iPhone XR or a XS to a Pixel 3. But since I did, I noticed one thing to be quite similar, and that is the vibration motor. Now, it's not quite as subtle and smooth as the one on the iPhone, but it's definitely the best in any Android phone. It's been spread out throughout the operating system, and if you pay attention, you can also listen to the sound it produces. It's kind of fun. But talking about that operating system, the software, firstly, it still has what I think are the best live wallpapers in any smartphone. It's also got fast and smooth animations. You can use the fingerprint sensor to pull down the notification panel. There's also a dark theme, but it sadly does not apply to any of the apps and is just limited to the notification panel and the app tray, so that's kind of sad. But the operating system in itself is a bit confusing at first. So now, no matter how hard you swipe up, you don't get directly to the app tray. You get access to recently used apps at the top and the most used apps at the bottom. Now, I do use this to access my most used apps, but it still does not make a lot of sense. Also, now the home button is like the navigation bar on the iPhones. So you can swipe right from it to jump directly to the last used app. But if you keep swiping right from the home, you would keep flickering between the last 2 apps, which again does not make a lot of sense to me. If you want to jump to a third app, then either you would have to swipe up to access multitasking, or you would have to swipe right and hold to get a list of all the apps and then swipe to flicker between those. It's very complex, and even though I've gotten a hang of it now after using it for so long, but considering the amount of trouble that a person who would switch to this phone would go through, it's completely unnecessary. But the good thing is that it's software, it's not permanent. So if Google receives a lot of criticism for this, maybe and hopefully they revert back to the previous launcher. But that's Pixel the phone. For me, because I used the Pixel 2 and because I know how trashy it was, because I have adjusted to this new launcher, because it fits perfectly in my hand, and most importantly, because I got it at a discounted price, it's been a really solid experience. And even though the battery life hasn't improved that much from the Pixel 2, I'm still below 20% at the end of the day at a very light usage, I would still give this the most improved smartphone of the year award. In fact, not just that, but also the best compact phone of the year. There you have it. Make sure to check out the last video, which is all about the other perspective, which is Pixel the camera. Talk to you in the next one. Take care.